Britain's conversation. LBC with James O'Brien.
11:48 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I talked to you at 10 o'clock about the way my mind works when I've taken a few days off. It just, I'm sure it bores you rigid, but if you are interested, I think it's because you don't have that pressure every minute that you're off there of thinking, what are we going to talk about tomorrow? Even if it's subconscious, you're constantly thinking about things, and is this story going to be a good one for us to discuss together? And things just spread out a little more when I'm not due on the radio the next morning. And oddly, it leads me back to the same question again and again and again, which I can't ask every day, but which I kind of would in a parallel universe. And that would be, what's the plan? Which is what we've been asking today. And it's a question I've asked Simon Marks before, and I will quite possibly ask him again in the course of the next 10 minutes, because LBC's US editor joins me live from Washington, D.C. We should begin, Simon, with a little sort of historic perspective on how significant what Trump has done with regard to California and the National Guard actually is.
Absolutely, James. I mean, you've got to go back 60 years. You've got to go back to 1965 to find any kind of precedent for this. Then President Lyndon Johnson ordered the Alabama National Guard to be federalized and taken over by his government against the opposition of Alabama's Governor George Wallace. And of course, at the time, what LBJ was trying to do was to allow black students to go into schools in Alabama. So that's the only close recent precedent for this. Every single state has its own National Guard, and absolutely the National Guard from various states has been deployed at various times of emergency and challenge in the United States. But since 1965, always with the approval of the governor of the state where the Guard is being deployed. And in this case, Donald Trump has completely overridden Governor Gavin Newsom, the prominent Democrat, who, of course, is the governor of California and almost certainly covets a run for the Democratic Party's presidential nomination in 2028. I think it's important to underscore that there is a real personal battle now underway between Donald Trump and one of the Republican Party's potential challengers in the next presidential election. And this is a move that Gavin Newsom is now appealing. He's urging the federal government to rescind the takeover of his National Guard, now deployed in their hundreds on the streets of Los Angeles, with the capacity, as a result of the president's order, for up to 2,000 members of the California National Guard to be deputized by the federal government to police protests that, and this is really important, James, yesterday Donald Trump described as insurrectionist. That is not a coincidental word. He is itching to use the Insurrection Act of 1807 to flood Los Angeles and potentially other cities and states all over the country with army troops, with the Marine Corps, not just with the National Guard. He actually wants to use the United States Armed Forces that were created, of course, to fight wars overseas on the streets of the United States. He tried to do it back in January of 2020 during the protests over the killing by police in Minneapolis of George Floyd. He was stopped by his then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, and his then Defense Secretary, Mark Esper, who stood up to Donald Trump and said, no, that's not what the army's for. That, if we get to the stage where he invokes the Insurrection Act, is not going to happen this time around.
I mean, the big question is why? Why does he want to do that? Why would he want to flood the streets with military personnel more used to activity in the Middle East, or more used to activity, as you say, on foreign soil?
because this is the perfect storm for him. I mean, first of all, let's remember where he was if we can cast our minds back 96 hours, right? He was on the receiving end of all sorts of attention regarding his bust-up with Elon Musk that he really didn't want to keep in the national conversation. So suddenly we learnt here on Saturday that he was going to travel to Camp David on Sunday, surround himself with senior figures in his own government and military advisors and military leaders. That was the first indication that there was a big distraction coming and a big page turn coming. And the page turn is for Donald Trump to take advantage of the fact that you have these protests, he says, by criminal aliens and migrants, although those are by no means the only people protesting his mass deportations on the streets of Los Angeles. You have these protests taking place in a reliably democratic state, a place where only last week he was making plans to halt all federal funding for California. So he's planned to pick this fight with Governor Newsom and the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass. It's an issue, mass deportations, that is wildly popular with his Make America Great Again base. And, I mean, we're going to have to find a new definition in the dictionary, a new word to replace the word irony, because I don't think it actually adequately covers what's happened in the last few hours. Donald Trump has taken to his own social media feed to say, arrest the people in face masks now. This is a president who has unleashed on the streets of cities all over this country federal agents masked, refusing to divulge even which agency they work for, who have swept people that they say are illegal immigrants off the streets. We've all seen dramatic videos of that taking place in towns and cities nationwide, and then denied those alleged illegal immigrants the due legal process that the law requires them to be given before, in the case of hundreds of them, they're stuck on planes and flown out of the country, most infamously, of course, to that terrorist detention camp in El Salvador. He is now the man saying, arrest the people in face masks now. The people on the streets are furious, in part because his agents, when they take to the streets and seize people off those streets, are all masked, refuse to divulge their identities, and in some cases, onlookers who have watched what has been taking place have suspected that kidnapping was actually occurring and have challenged federal law enforcement agents, clearly from the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Division of his government and or from the Border Patrol, to unmask themselves and reveal who they are, and they all refuse to do it.
Yeah, you're right. And irony doesn't cover it, does it? It feels like an inadequate description of what you're describing. Final question. And you mentioned the base and their ravenous appetite for these scenes of violence, which, you know, can probably be loosely described as choreographed or at least escalated by Donald Trump. Is there any limit to that? The fracture has to come, doesn't it, between people who hate what they're seeing and people who love it? What's that fracture going to look like?
Well, I'm afraid that we have to let this situation play out.
Yes.
And the great fear, of course, is that he does flood the zone with troops. I mean, again, last night on social media, looking really bad in L.A., he wrote, bring in the troops in all capitals. He is itching for this fight. And clearly, there were protesters last night on the streets of Los Angeles who were engaged in acts of violence against law enforcement, in direct contravention of the pleas of Governor Newsom and Mayor Bass, who urged people not to take the bait from Donald Trump. Some of them have taken the bait. Donald Trump covets a showdown, and in a febrile tinderbox atmosphere like the one that already exists in Los Angeles, protests spread last night to San Francisco. We may see this accelerating across the country. Certainly in the last few weeks, protesters have become increasingly emboldened as they have sought to confront ICE agents as they go about the process of seizing people off the streets to enforce Donald Trump's mass deportation policies. I mean, that's a really dangerous cocktail. And the man in charge in the White House, unconstrained by any of his top officials, because they're all yes men, they're all and women, they're all going to give him exactly what he wants, has the capacity here to accelerate this situation. Gavin Newsom was arguing to inflame it. And, you know, clearly that creates a very combustible atmosphere here. So we have to see how far he's willing to go. Are we going to see violence on the streets where the army is used to use perhaps lethal rounds against protesters on American streets? And how much rope will the Make America Great Again faithful give him?
A brief word, if you would, Simon, on Terry Moran over at ABC News and what that tells us about the state of play in our profession.
Well, look, I'm a great admirer of Terry Moran. I think that this is a terribly sad twist for his career. He has been, for a very long time, one of the most erudite and responsible television journalists in this city and indeed in this country. I think he made a mistake. I think that it is unfortunate that he said what he said on Twitter, on X rather. But what is completely inappropriate in Terry Moran's situation is for the White House to be contacting his employer, ABC News, and putting pressure on them to hold Terry Moran accountable. They were already engaged in the process of accountability. They would have suspended him anyway because of what he wrote. I mean, you can argue about the general sentiments that he was expressing about White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller. Many people in this country would agree with what Terry Moran said.
His own uncle has gone further on the record.
His own uncle agrees with what Terry Moran has said. I mean, I think the difficulty with what Terry Moran wrote was where he said, you can just see it, you know? That to me is the phrase that ultimately got him into difficulty. But, you know, it's a lesson to all of us in terms of the use of social media, but also it's an indicator of the fact that this White House has absolutely no respect whatsoever for the First Amendment, for the Fourth Estate, and is going to put the arm in a continuing way on what it dismissively refers to as the legacy media, in this case adding weight to what may end up proving to be a career-ending error on the part of one of the most prominent television reporters here.
And, of course, the one that pointed out that the knuckles of Abrego Garcia were not tattooed with gang affiliations, which seems to have upset Trump. And so I have to crack on. Thank you so much. 12 noon is the time.